life as we have come to know it. So, and then we did have some degree of focus on the transmission side. So once we generate these electrons, we need to transport them. So we did have a discussion on the transmission side, and I did indicate that on the transmission side, we still require a significant amount of investments. Our computation suggests that we need anything upwards of 210 billion rands, and we also shared with you what are some of the constraints that can undermine our ability to bring on stream the renewable generation capacity, and that has largely to do with the Eskom balance sheet, which is constrained, might not be sufficient to be able to support the kind of investments, that tickets that is required. And we did give you the assurance that part of the work that we are doing under work stream number 10, so just for a recap, the Minister of Electricity, supported by the National Electricity Crisis Committee, a body that is made up of technocrats, bureaucrats with extensive experience in the energy sector, and then we have divided that into a number of work streams. And work stream number 10 is the one that is focused on the issues around transmission. So that work stream, led by the Minister, is working to ensure that we are able to fashion solutions on how best to finance the expansion and the strengthening of the transmission, so that we are able to connect the renewable energy capacity that is located in areas that has got very little grid capacity. And I'm referring here to the areas of the Northern Cape, where we have a significant amount of renewable energy resources in the form of PV, and then also the coastal areas of the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape that has got the best wind speed. So it is in those areas where we are experiencing significant challenges in relation to capacity, and therefore they are going to constitute the priority areas for us to expand the new lines. And of course, Eskom has done a computation, some degree of modeling on the amount of investments that are required, and we did share that with you in one of those focus briefings. We'll come back with regards to the update, in particular on the choices that we'll be making to ensure that we're able to address the transmission side, especially the financing. So today we are giving attention to the last leg, if you like, the last mile. Once you are transporting these electrons, for them to get to your house, for them to get to industry, we need what we call distribution infrastructure. And I must say that the distribution infrastructure is not in good shape. And there you have a combination of both Eskom and municipalities, and largely on the municipality side, as a result of a significant underinvestments over a period of time. We had done a longitudinal study trying to track the amount of investments that have been made by municipalities in relation to refurbishment, replenishment, and replacing and/or the maintenance of the distribution infrastructure. And we have found that they are underspending by about 2.5 billion rands, and over time that has accumulated to upwards of 30 billion rands. And that's why today you have communities that can go over weeks, for a period of weeks rather, without having electricity. Lichtenburg, in Ditsobota municipality is a case in point. There are multiple other communities in the country where you find that transformers, substations have failed, they've blown as a result of the demand that exceeds the installed capacity of those assets, and those assets can't sustain, if you like, the demand and the pressures that is placed on them, and then they get to explode. And some of them is as a result of failure, the inability of municipality to service these assets has resulted in these assets failing, and outside load shedding, communities are subjected to days to no end of no access to electricity. So we're working with Eskom, the head of distribution and his team, to ensure that we, and National Treasury, an important part, and SALGA, to ensure that we are able to find the most sustainable solution to the resolution of this problem. Because in large part, third-party users are the ones that are the biggest casualties. So you go to a space, people are up to date in relation to their municipal bills, in particular electricity. Some of them are on prepaid meters, and by definition they are able to consume, provided that they have a sufficient amount of units. But these communities and industry are not getting the electricity that they deserve, the electricity that they've paid for, as a result of the failure of infrastructure, and the municipalities are not in a position to replace those assets because they don't have the money, or they can't pay Eskom, of course, to replace that type of infrastructure. So we are going to give some degree of attention to that problem. And I must say that we are not sitting with all the solutions, like I said. We are working with our teams at Eskom, especially the Monde, the head of generation, and his team, to make sure that we are finding sustainable solutions. And I must add that Salga is also part of the equation. I also want to report that on the generation side, on Friday, I had the honor of accepting and also the invitation by the Minister of Mines and Energy in Namibia, Minister Aluendo, and also accompanied by his Deputy Minister, Deputy Minister Shilunga, and the leadership of the entities that are responsible for the oil sector, the energy sector, NamPower in particular in Namibia. And really the conversations were about two things. First is it's about some of the efforts that Namibia is putting in place to make sure that its energy sufficient, but also in the course of resolving their own energy sovereignty, they've been able to make significant oil discoveries, and their view is that they can make those available to South Africa. There's the Kudu gas project that provides tangible solutions to energy deficit, both in the region and in South Africa, and the indication there is that 400 megawatts of gas to power could be available by 2026. They are prepared to ramp that up to about 600 megawatts for as long as they can be an off-take. And of course, we have advanced those conversations working with our counterparts in Namibia, and this is part of our efforts to ensure that we are able to inform the transition, lower the carbon emissions, amount of fossil fuels as we move from coal. We are able to draw from gas resources, and then of course I did share with you the work that we are doing with our colleagues in Mozambique, so that we are able to build resilience to the South African energy economy. We are able to have significant amount of certainty in relation to the future as we address the now, which is load shedding. We need to build a significant capacity for the South African economy to meet its needs going into the future. And that conversation doesn't start a year later. It has to start now, because some of these projects, they take a significant amount of time to come on stream, and that's why we are having those conversations. And to the extent that we are able to firm up our agreements with the Namibians, will make that available to the country. I want to also just take the opportunity, as per custom, just to take you through what has been the performance of the Eskom units over the week that there was. And I'm referring to the week in terms of our timelines that ended the 18th of August on Friday. So the good news here is that we are really beginning to stabilize in relation to the capacity available. So we are not seeing those extreme oscillations of 60% and 55%. So we can see we are stabilizing at 60%. So before we can be able to grow consistently, it's important that we are able to stabilize. So you can see we are plateauing at about 28,000 megawatts plus, which amounts to 60% energy availability factor. Again, the energy availability factor here, I'm referring to the reliability of the units and the efficiency of these units. So those are the two major indicators. And the average for the period, again, of ending Friday, the 18th of October, we're at 28,237 megawatts. And each day of the week, we're able to breach the 28,000 megawatts, except on the Friday, the day. And what are some of the things that are possible as a result of the consistency of this available supply? Now we're in a position to ramp up, if you like, planned outages. I was having a conversation with some stakeholders. They were asking the question now, Minister Ramokgopa, we are going into summer period, demand is going to come down to be sub 30,000 megawatts. Are you going to accelerate, if you like, the reduction of the intensity of load shedding? And yes, the answer is yes, but of course we are going to manage that pace. And that pace we are going to manage because as we improve and we are able to stabilize in relation to available capacity, we can do an expedient measure and just give you for a considerable period of time no load shedding. But what we are doing, at least in the period, the week that was, we have ramped up, if you like, planned outages. So even with the increased planned outages, remember when we went into the winter period, we said we are going to keep the planned outages at a maximum of 2,500 megawatts, and you can see now we are ramping it up now. We have almost doubled the planned outages. Why are we doing that? We are doing that because we want to ensure that when we return these machines continue to be reliable and they generate the megawatts at the designed capacity. So the point I'm making is that it's a short-term pain, but for a long-term gain and pleasure. So that when we return these units, when I'm saying that now, we are beginning to see an improvement going significantly higher than the 60% EAF. We are able to sustain it over a period of time, and we are able to undermine oscillations. And of course, as we take out these units, then you have to enforce some degree of load shedding. And that's why during the day we are keeping it at stage 1. But of course, we are going to provide some relief later in the week to make sure that even during the day we are able to undermine stage 1, because the improvements, they keep on coming. And of course, as the improvements come and the demand goes down, as we ramp up planned outages, we still have a situation where during parts of the day we are most likely going to have a situation where we don't have to have a load shedding. Of course, the PM peak period is a different conversation. We are still going to see the levels of load shedding that we are seeing as we continue to make these improvements. And once we get out of this situation, we'll be saying with a degree of confidence that we have ended load shedding. We can place some degree of reliance on these units. An area that continues to be an albatross that we have to address and is receiving our attention is again on the unplanned capacity loss factor. Like I said, these units, as they fail, they're taking out the megawatts, and that's why we have to ramp up what is planned maintenance. And also, as the unit comes out, we are able to ensure that we do the best that is possible to give confidence when these units are coming back. You know that at the height of winter, the height of load shedding, this number was sitting at about 18,000 megawatts, and you see now we're averaging the past week about 15,387 megawatts, and in fact on Friday and also on Thursday of last week we were able to breach the 15,000 megawatts of unplanned capacity loss factor. And I said before that we want to see this number being sub 13,000 megawatts, and those megawatts will be either added into the available capacity or we are going to take out the additional units so that we get to fix them, and we have an opportunity for us to retain these units with some degree of confidence. And then the area of partial load losses, we are not making the kind of improvements that are required. Again, the partial load losses means that the units are on load, they are producing the megawatts, but it's not at their designed capacity. We average about 6,530 megawatts in the last week. An area of significant improvement is on the outage slips. And this talks to the degree of planning, very precise, deliberate, making sure as we take out this unit, remember I said there's planned maintenance. If it's planned maintenance, it's us who decide when to take out the unit. So when we make that decision to take out that unit, it means that in the workshop we have the equipment, we have the parts that are necessary, that are required for the replacement. And when we make the promise to the country that will return Unit X at this station, that unit comes back on that day as promised, because we have planned properly. The personnel, the equipment, the spare parts are available, and we're able to replace, fix it, and then return it. And remember, when I was here the last time, we're sitting upwards of 2,000 megawatts. When we started very early in May, this number was significantly higher. Now we're at 766 megawatts. And really, I want to commend our team led by Mr. Nxumalo for the excellent work that they are doing. And it's as a result of leadership. And this leadership is beginning to have an appreciation of planning as a function of the resolution of this energy crisis in the country. Like I said, it's important that we have a baseline. A baseline essentially is a reference point when we want to have an appreciation of the kind of improvements or lack of improvements we are making. It must be a function of some baseline. So what is that baseline? So the baseline, we said we agreed that we are going to use May 2023 as our baseline. On the outage slips, we're sitting at above 3,300 megawatts. So we're failing to return the units at the period that we promised to return them, and a total of 3,300 megawatts were taken out as a result of our failure to meet our own deadlines. We brought that number down. We averaged about 2,045 in the period of July, and now as I speak to you, we're at about 766. So essentially, you have added an additional 2,600 megawatts as a result of planning, better planning on the part of management. And of course, as you add those 2,000 megawatts, it's able to increase the available capacity, and then it also gives us an opportunity to do what we call good maintenance. So we really want to keep on improving this number, and I want to commend the team for the work that we are doing. So it's important that I share these indicators with the general public so that there's a greater appreciation that all the matrices or the unit of measure in terms of the improvement of generating capacity are all positive. And of course, on the outage slips, the lower it is, it means that it is positive. We are heading in the right direction. Again, on the issues with regards to planned outages, I've shared with you the work that we are doing. In May, we're sitting at about 3,400. Now, because of the improvements we are making, we are adding another 1,000 megawatts of the units we are taking out so that we give ourselves time to fix these units. As we return them, they are reliable, they produce at percentages that are closer to or approximate their design capacity. And that means that the system becomes more reliable. We have megawatts that are consistent. We are able to support the South African economy going forward. Like I said, on the unplanned capacity loss factor, the rate at which these units were failing, when we started in May, we're sitting at about 17,380, and now as I speak to you, we're at 15,387. So essentially, 2,000 megawatts of unplanned capacity loss factor. So essentially, we've been able to undermine these units, the rate of their failure, and we've been able to claw back 2,000 megawatts. And that is as a result of the deliberate nature of how we are approaching this problem to ensure that we improve on planned maintenance. And that's why you are beginning to see resilience in this in the system going forward. And then, like I promised, I want to share with you the area around distribution. I must say that we are encountering significant challenges in this area. Municipalities are owing Eskom an inordinate amount of money. So the overdue debt is sitting at about 63.2 billion. The top 20 municipalities alone, they account for 77% of that, about 48 billion rands. And the growth of this debt year to date, it's about 4.7 billion rands. So it means that they were adding more and more debt to Eskom and undermining Eskom's ability to invest money in the generation, the transmission, and also distribution. Because remember that we're still in the exercise of making sure that we create unique entities that reports to the group that is called Eskom. You know the work we are doing on the transmission side, the work we are doing on the distribution side. But this just adds to erode the bottom line of Eskom. So Eskom is not in a position to respond to these challenges because of the debt that is throttling its ability to be able to respond to the challenges. A significant amount of work is being done to address these challenges. And like I said to my point earlier on, there are communities, as I speak to you, they don't have electricity, not because of load shedding, but because of failures of transformers, because of failure of substations. I mean, just to give you an indication, just the Vaal area, the area of the Vaal there, there's about 680 transformers that Eskom has installed. About 367 of them had to be replaced, or 680 transformers that they had failed and required attention. 367 of those 680, Eskom has already replaced them. And about 313 of them are in the process of being replaced. And it's worrying to mention that 33 of those that have already been replaced are repeat failures. So as Eskom comes and makes this intervention, it's a capex, they run into a similar problem much later in the future. What does this do? It just takes out all the maintenance budget that Eskom would have directed at the replenishment of these assets. It's concentrated in one area, and in the majority of these instances, you find a situation where people are not paying for consumption. So it's an area that is going to receive attention going forward. Again, in the Vaal area, 13 mini-subs had failed, 11 has already been replaced, and 2 are outstanding. I'm just isolating that as one example, but this is prevalent across the length and breadth of the country. And that's why it's important that we have to do something to resolve this. And the conversation we're having with our colleagues from distribution, we're having with National Treasury and SALGA, to find a sustainable solution of ensuring that we undermine, if you like, non-technical losses. So people who are just consuming and not paying for their consumption. Of course, there are those that are indigent. There's a package that is directed to indigent. There's a facility that is made available so that they get a particular threshold of free electricity over a period of time. Those will not be affected. But we're essentially talking about those who can afford and are not paying, and those who are making illegal connections. And these are overburdening the infrastructure, and that's why we're seeing the increased rate of failure. It also has implications on what we call the notified maximum demand, NMD. Notified maximum demand essentially is a contracted amount of megawatts that Municipality X says they want to get from Eskom. As a result of the exponential growth of, if you like, communities, industry coming into the space, and also illegal connections in the main, you find that the municipalities are exceeding that. And how Eskom works is that on the basis of that notifiable maximum demand, they are able to make a determination on the capacity of the assets that are required to be able to support this demand. Once you exceed it, once there's illegal connections, once there's what we call izinyoka, it places a significant burden on this infrastructure. The infrastructure fails, and who are the major casualties? It's the good-paying residents, it's the poor who are registered on the indigent, and it's also industry that is not able to produce. As a result, some of the industries in the areas of Lichtenberg, in Ditsobotla, have come out public that they're considering relocation and or closing as a result of demand that is unserviced because of the failing infrastructure that has got a disproportionate impact on the capacity of that space to be able to provide the employment opportunities, and as a result, people will migrate to other areas of opportunity, and then the municipality's revenue base is going to be eroded. And therefore it becomes financially unviable, and those spaces cannot be spoken of in economic terms. So the point I'm simply trying to make is that this has got significant implications, and we're trying to address that. On the distribution side, I always make the point we're addressing the 4 Ds. The first one is around decarbonization. So we know that we have removed the cap on embedded generation. We are seeing a great deal of private sector interest, a significant appetite, almost insatiable. We have 66 gigawatts rather of pipeline of projects by private sector at various stages of project life cycle, and those contributes towards our decarbonization agenda. We're seeing also the proliferation of solar PV households as a part of taking advantage of these measures that have been introduced by the Minister of Finance. Are beginning to roll out a PV solution. Even the state will be coming into that space, retrofitting some of our buildings. And then there's a need for us to be able to democratize that space to make sure that we are able to make transactions by private parties possible. And that's why we are seeing the issues around the requirements for wheeling. There's a project developer, one end of the province, one end of the city. There's a wheeling off-taker, the other end of the city. They need to transport those electrons, and that's what we call wheeling. That arrangement of having access to existing infrastructure, either by Eskom and or the municipality to transport the electrons is made available, and that's an exercise of wheeling. We're working on that. And then there's issues around the decentralization. We're seeing the emergence of microgrid, and also that is important just to protect the integrity of the grid so that there's not a single point of failure is something that is coming up, and also the issue of digitization with regards to grid systems and modernization, so that from a systems point of view, we've got a helicopter view and appreciation of what is happening on the grid, and we also have opportunities to manage the grid in a fashion that makes it possible for us to continue to provide the sustainable supply of electricity. And then there are attended challenges. They are not necessarily all of them structural, but these are challenges that have proven to be stubborn on the distribution side, and we are doing everything to address it. Chief amongst those is the municipal debt. Is the elephant in the room. Like I said, 63 billion rand continues to grow. Year-to-date growth is about 4.2 billion rand. And in fact, we know that at the rate at which we're experiencing this, even the growth, the annual growth of municipal debt is going to increase and increase exponentially. That makes places a burden on Eskom. It's something that requires attention, and I did make the point that as part of work stream number 10, working with the key stakeholders, Eskom, Salga, were at the table having this conversation, of course, spearheaded by the ministry. There are issues of losses, both technical and non-technical losses. On the non-technical losses is people who are just connecting illegally. So essentially having access to electricity that they are not willing to pay for, and placing significant burden on existing infrastructure which is not designed to accommodate this surge or increase in the demand. And as a result of that, the transformers fails, the mini-subs fail. The poor are affected, those that are on the indigent register. The businesses are affected. Households that are in good standing in relation to their municipal bills are affected because we take time to replace these assets. And part of the problem is because of the rate of the failure of these mini-subs and transformers. There's a supply challenge that we're having. So the suppliers can't keep up with the demand. And part of the problem with this demand is that this demand can't be planned for. Can't be planned for because we don't know at which point is this transformer going to fail because we don't know who's connecting illegally. Otherwise, the team will be able to plan and give an indication to industry. This is demand, and industry can make the necessary investment, capital investment, to expand production so that they are able to meet this new demand. But this demand comes as and when the units are failing, and that's why it's important that we need to address this. There are issues around income versus cost of sale. This is an area that requires attention. Of course, it's got tariff implications, but we need to have an honest conversation about what some of these challenges are. And we are seeing that there's a decline in sale and there's a need for a revenue augmentation. So if you talk to municipalities, as you know, the configuration of the revenue streams of municipalities, especially our big metros, a significant part of their incomes is coming from the sale of electricity. And because they are placing a surcharge, an additional percentage on what Eskom is charging them, there's an additional income stream. They are able to distribute it to poor communities, to invest in infrastructure. Because they are selling less as a result of load shedding, they are selling less as a result of the failing of this infrastructure. There's less money coming, and these municipalities are becoming increasingly illiquid, and therefore they can't meet their obligation, including first to their employees, to infrastructure, and in particular in this instance to the assets that Eskom has made available to make sure that we are able to address the issues around distribution. Like I said, the debts are totaling over 63 billion rands. The top 20 municipalities account for 77% of that. So it's important that we have an honest conversation. There's an arrangement that has been made with some of these municipalities, especially those that are exceeding the maximum notifiable demand. Like I said, a recap, maximum notifiable demand is contracted maximum demand of electricity between Municipality X and Eskom, and as a result of illegal connection and growth that was not projected, they are exceeding that number. And what does Eskom do? It does what we call load reduction. So these communities are subjected to a number of challenges, in addition to load shedding. And of course, we are making every effort to resolve that, and I've said that we are confident of resolving that challenge. They are subjected to issues around load reduction, because you must distribute the load so that you are able to accommodate for capacity, for demand that exceeds the capacity that these assets have been designed for. So it means that communities in other parts of the country are going for longer periods of time without electricity, not because of load shedding, but because of these challenges, and we are doing everything to address that. There's a number of municipalities that have entered into some agreements. Of course, they do fail to live up to those agreements because essentially their revenue base has been eroded. They are unable to sustain those arrangements going into the future. It's a liquidity problem. It's an economic problem outside the challenges of Eskom and load shedding that requires a bigger conversation beyond the conversation on electricity, the replacement of the assets, and the cost is to make those spaces economically viable. Of course, a key ingredient in that is to make sure that there's quality, reliable electricity supply, and that's why we're doing on the side of the ministry to address this challenge. Like I said, 28 payments plans have been made in place, been put in place with a number of municipalities. Of course, some of the metros continue to owe the municipality, and then some of the metros continue to owe Eskom, I'm sorry, and then some of the payments are made late. I'm elevating this without necessarily mentioning who are those municipalities to say there's a bigger problem. There's a problem of the financial unsustainability of the municipal spaces as we know them. And they've got huge implications on the ability of Eskom to ensure that we are able to replenish the distribution infrastructure. So the message I'm trying to convey is that when we get to a situation where we have resolved load shedding, it doesn't follow that communities are going to have electricity as a result of the failing of these assets. And that's why we're having 3 lanes in the conversation, parallel lanes. We're resolving the generation, and that's the part we share with you consistently, religiously on a Sunday morning. We're resolving the transmission side. It's principally the financing of that transmission, and we're resolving the distribution side. It's both financing, it's the state of municipality, it's also consumer behavior and acts of illegality that are undermining our ability to be able to provide sustainable electricity supply. So we thought that we must elevate the issues around the issues of distribution. Like I said, we are still working on finding answers on how we are resolving that. But the comfort we want to give to communities is that we are attending to all of these problems. We are not waiting to resolve load shedding and then much later we go and address the distribution side. We are addressing the entire ecosystem so that we have a foolproof, comprehensive solution on the resolution of the energy problem, electricity rather problem in the country. When we say load shedding is over, no community should be subjected to instances where they don't have electricity because a mini sub or a transformer has failed. We'd have addressed those issues. Thank you very much, DJ.
Thank you very much, Minister, for that wealth of information. We're now going to be moving to the questions. But let me first introduce the team that is working with Minister and might have to take some questions as well. I would start on his left with Mr. Silas Zimu, who's the advisor to the Minister. Next to him, we have Mr. Municipal, who's the group executive of distribution in Eskom.
I see that the NRS 048-9, the new version is established for coming, and the stage 1 load shedding is a reduction of 5% of demand at the time. Now, I don't understand how the 5% relates to 1,000 megawatt per stage, because clearly the demand at the time will fluctuate, and 5% of the stage 9,000 is not 1,000 megawatt. If you can please help me to understand that. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoinette. The colleague from Independent Media Group.
Alan Price from Independent Media. terms of the ecosystem, can you address the question about transmission? There seems to be a parliament with the energy, electricity regulation amendment. Is that still on track for this year, or is it only going to happen next year? And then, is it possible when you brief us on a weekly basis to also include what's happening in terms of imports and exports?
Thank you so much. Vanessa, can you take us through the online questions? Mr. Alan?
Thank you, DG. The online questions, the first question is coming from Romy from the Reuters. The question is, what is the estimated funding required to upgrade distribution capacity, and how will that be funded? And the second question, DG, still from Romy, what is the plan for the separation of distribution and what approvals and licenses, and what is the realistic timeline for it? And this is Nelly Yoga from Network Reform, and the question is the understanding that the minister paid to of 30 billion rand, over which period is it? And Freya from Daily Maverick, and the question is, why was Monday's launch of a distribution track by Mr. Monde postponed? Is it because of the electricity regulation amendment bill being sold at Parliament? And we have Terence Kima, Engineering News. The question is, what long-term constitution-aligned solutions are being discussed to address the 30 billion distribution infrastructure backlog, as well as the fractured nature of the sector? And Susan Naidu, who is a freelance journalist for Legal News South Africa. And the question is, can the minister confirm if load shedding will be suspended for the duration of the BRICS summit this week due to the negative implications it has on security and logistical arrangements, and considering the magnitude of the event, and if the minister consulted with Eskom with regards to this matter? And Terence Kramer is back again from Engineering News. The question is, please could you explain the reason for the delay of the tabling of the ERA bill following its approval by Cabinet in March, and comment on the likelihood that the legislation will be approved by the current Parliament? And the promise from Reuters, what are the options being explored to deal with the 63.2 billion debt sitting in the distribution sector? And the second last question from William Hon, representing Network Reform. What is the target PCLF for the summer period? And the last question from Reuters again is, are the challenges of the distribution sector also likely to hold back successive bid window rounds for renewables, battery storage and gas power? Thank you, DG.
Thank you very much, Tagalani. Minister, we will start with Rudy. We'll start with Rudy. You can come over, Rudy. Then you'll be followed directly by Monde as well. Thank you. Then we will get Monde Bala, the Group Executive of Eskom Distribution, to come and respond to a few questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Namode. Very good morning. Sorry, I just want to orientate myself. So, yeah, Antoinette, I'm sure talk to the issues regarding the regulator, but what I can confirm is that there are ongoing conversations with the regulator on the matters that we have raised, and hopefully sooner rather than later we will get to some resolution on some of those matters. Apologies. We are dealing with some of those matters through the NECOM process as well, whereby we try to expedite some of the key decisions that have been made, specifically by the regulator. On the issue of the dispute at Frankfurt, in Eskom's views, the substance of the issue was dealt with through the court process. You may know that rural maintenance, before they went to the regulator, they first went to court. And there was an outcome of that process wherein the court made its own determination regarding the matter. So in our humble view, that was dealt with then. What was where the position is from us is quite clear. The self-generation by Frankfurt, being managed by rural maintenance, is part of the base, and as such, it is factored in when load shedding is implemented. We have given a few options to rural maintenance on how the matter can be dealt with, and we are continuing those conversations with rural maintenance to find a solution to that matter. On the issue of 5% and the 1,000 megawatts, the 1,000 megawatts has always been indicative. It's not an absolute value. So if the shortage is within that range, then stage 1 is implemented. So it could be 600 megawatts, it could be 800, but if it's within 1,000, then stage 1 will then be invoked. The question on the funding that is required for the refurbishment of the distribution grid or the distribution infrastructure, as part of the NECOM Workstream 9 process, that we're in the process of determining that figure. I do have a figure in as far as we do have some indicative figures in as far as the Eskom infrastructure is concerned. The process that we're going through now is making sure that we get the figures from for the municipal infrastructure, and then again through the NECOM, we're looking at possible funding options or opportunities that are there to deal with the maintenance and refurbishment of the distribution infrastructure. There are talks about the JET project funding opportunities, and that is part of a conversation that is currently on the go. On the postponement of the launch of the distribution energy trader, I think the answer, it was quite simple. We had not exhausted all the internal governance processes within Eskom and within the shareholder ministry, and that's what we're doing. Hopefully in the next 2 weeks we will have ticked all of those boxes, and then we'll announce a new date for the launch of the distribution energy trader. I'll speak on behalf of the minister. He did address the issue of the load shedding during breaks, that it's not limited to events. It's basically triggered by the difference in the demand and supply. So there was a question on the package for the municipal debt and how we're dealing with the 60-odd billion that is currently being owed to Eskom by municipalities. When the Minister of Finance made an announcement during his budget speech and talked about the municipal debt relief, we have worked with National Treasury on the details of how the package is going to to be dealt with. We have finalized that. We are now in the process of implementing that relief package. I think what is key is two things. One, municipalities must apply to be part of this package, Two, there's certain conditions that make them qualify for this package, and the payment of current accounts is a key issue. So we will monitor the payment patterns for the next 12 months, and then we'll trigger the first tranche of that relief package if they stick to the payment of their current account. Minister, I think I've covered all the issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monde. Just to say thank you, Helmut, for coming through. It's nice meeting you. And to you and other journalists, we genuinely appreciate your interest and the kind of questions that you are asking, because they help to us to clarify the questions, the robustness. So thank you very much to you, Antoinette, Terence, Andile, all of you, Paul Met. We genuinely appreciate the time you take to join us and ask those probing questions. They are very important for purposes of accountability and transparency. Thanks for that, and most welcome. Antoinette, just on the issue of the regulator, of course, I mean, the appreciation is that it's an independent body, so I can't invite the regulator to come and share stage with the executive authority. I want to separate those lines so that they don't become opaque, and we don't provide impressions, give impressions rather, of the executive authority over exerting his or her influence over the regulator, and I'm sure the regulator will not permit that. To the extent that there are issues that requires to be clarified with the regulator, we do have sessions with the regulator, but ultimately the regulator will make that determination. We'll try and impress upon agency what our views are, and that's why the law is very explicit and separates the two. So yes, I can't talk of exerting pressure, but we'll impress upon the regulator on matters that requires agency, and the regulator will make that determination. And Helmut, on the ERA, and I think a few others, Terence also raised the question. Remember that the executive, the cabinet has made its views. That's now a parliamentary process. So what the cabinet has sought to do is to ask the leader of government business, the deputy president, to help to accelerate the passage of that piece of legislation. But it's a parliamentary process. Just the other day I was listening to my friend, the chair of the portfolio committee, and he was raising issues around whether it's possible to achieve the kind of results we want in the current administration, will not interfere with that process. So the interface between the executive and the legislature is the leader of government business. So we'll leave that to the DP. We had asked that this receive attention for obvious reasons. I think it can undermine our quest to resolve load shedding, to address the issues of energy security, and there's an overall appreciation about that. So we will give you an indication on how those conversations are unfolding, but it's something that we leave to the leader of government business. On explicitly stating the import-export is fine, and that level of detail we will endeavor to provide that. Helmut, as what we do, it's aggregated in the available capacity, but I think the question there is that can you please just give an indication so that we are able to track that the degree to which we are importing, I can imagine, against what is contracted. So we'll try and do that, Helmut. Just on the issues around the distribution, the kind of the debt, the question Mondes attempted to resolve that. Of course, some of this requires fiscal support, and the Minister of Finance and National Treasury have worked out on what are some of the preconditions for municipalities to qualify them for possibility of extinguishing that debt with Eskom. It includes, amongst others, agreeing to the rollout of smart meters. It also has to do with making sure that they remove all the people who are illegally connected, the illegal connections. Those are some of the conditions. How this will be funded, of course, there's a Eskom component where they are responsible for distribution, and Eskom, of course, does factor that into their own budgeting component. And I'm really least concerned about that. The biggest concern, Paul made, really is on the municipal side. Because of the financial health of municipalities, very liquid, some of them are insolvent and they are not raising sufficient revenue to meet, if you like, their operational activities, and therefore going to find it very difficult for some of them, even having included some of the grants, to be able to direct that to replenish, refurbish, maintain these assets. So, like I said earlier on, it's a conversation we want to have with COGTA, SALGA, to see how best we are able to resolve this situation. In relation to that 2.5 billion rand under investment by municipalities in electricity infrastructure, which has accumulated to 30 billion rand, the question was over what period. So we had done this computation in my previous responsibilities as the head of investment and infrastructure, and that was the period 2011 to 2022. And I can imagine that, of course, the amount of underinvestment in that infrastructure on an annual basis, I can imagine, I mean, it has grown. I don't have to examine the facts, but just on the basis anecdotally of what is available to us in relation to the continued deterioration of municipal finances, they are highly unlikely to have kept up with whatever the number was at the time. So this is seeing rapid deterioration. And that's why I'm saying that the failure of this infrastructure is going to continue to increase over a period of time, if not exponentially, as a result of this amount of underinvestment. Of course, how we're going to address that, it will be in the totality of those conversations, how you begin to repurpose the grants. Of course, SALGA has also taken Eskom to court in relation to the constitutional obligations of municipalities. The argument there is that municipalities, and of course the constitution is very explicit, they are responsible for reticulation. So that's what the constitution says. But what is the reality of the situation? Is that for you to reticulate, you need to be having significant amount of budget to be able to perform that responsibility, maintain, refurbish, look after those assets. And we know that's not the situation now. Of course, if they win the case, they will go that route. It will mean that Eskom must pull out of that space. And we know that municipalities, even your marquee municipalities in the form of metros, are finding it very difficult to sustain the kind of investments that are required in that space. On the issues of the bricks, just to reiterate what I said before, load shedding is a tool that is introduced when generation far exceed, demand far exceed generation. We want to protect the grid. They want to ensure that the integrity of the grid is preserved. For as long as demand far exceed generation, we are going to have load shedding. No one is spared except those institutions, some hospitals, some national key points that are exempted. The last time I checked, the Santen Convention is not such a space. Unless if for that particular day there's that declaration, is a different conversation. But if there's no load shedding in that area, it could be that on that day there's no load shedding during that period planned for that time, or perhaps Joburg would have reassigned the schedule for load shedding. But everyone must contribute and no one is spared. I think that's the point we raised the last time. On the plant capacity loss factor, essentially our plant maintenance, there is no figure, but I know that initially when we were discussing with the colleagues at Eskom, I mean, you can even go up to 8,000 megawatts. I'm not saying that's a figure that is agreed upon, but I'm saying it's a function of the performance of your generating asset. It's also a function of what's happening also on the demand side. We know that demand will continue to go down. It will plateau, we think, at about 27,000 megawatts. When there's an increased performance of these units, we know that there's a Milupi that will be coming on stream. That gives us an opportunity for what we call good maintenance. We are going to do that. What is that precise figure? I'm sure Becky and the team will work on that. The figure of 8,000 is something that was raised in the past, but I'm sure if there's a precise figure, and I'm sure there will be, I mean, there's a science to these things, we'll be able to share that with you in the next briefing. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister, for those responses. Colleagues, we're now moving to the last round of questions. Do we have any in the room? Antoinette, do you have a follow-up? Yes, I can realize that. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister, I appreciate what you said about the independence of the regulator. Mr. Dix at an earlier session said that NICOM is working on, for example, discussion documents and frameworks that then goes to NERSA. Does that not compromise NERSA's independence?
Thank you, Antoinette. All right, okay. Thank you, Tagalan. You can take us through the online questions.
Thanks, DG. We only have 2 questions on this round, and we've done this so much from News 24. And the question is, the Minister mentioned an off-taker who will be required for the gas-to-power contracts for Namibia. Does this mean the off-taker might not necessarily be Eskom, but rather companies and other major energy users? And we have Janine Erasmus from Business Day. Does the Minister know how many municipalities have applied for the debt relief plan that was launched by Treasury earlier this year, and how many of these applications were successful? Thank you, DG.
Thank you very much, Tagalan. Minister? Okay, Rudy will start, and then Minister will follow.
Thanks, Antoinette. I thought the Minister had explained quite eloquently why it's important for us to accept that NERSA, in terms of the Act, is an independent regulator and authority. And that's fundamental. But as the whole of government, I think what we're trying to have is a discussion amongst us, understanding the independence of each and every. Eskom itself. So when Eskom has to make decisions, irrespective of how we engage with one another, it has to go through its governance structures. It has to go to its executive committees, where Mondi sits there with the GE and its CFO, and then it has to make recommendations to the board. So, for example, let me just give a good example. Although we have made a number of recommendations, for example, on emergency procurement that Eskom should go through as NICOM, that process went through governance structures, right? So we can't take decisions without undermining the authority of that. So similarly, as I said to you, the NERSA, we are in the process with industry, with Eskom, with a whole set of different partners in developing specific interventions where we think it's going to be quite critical in providing guidance. So recall I said to you the last time that we have developed as NICOM, under the auspices of a whole set of different industry players, developed a net billing framework. What we did with that net billing framework is handed to the regulator because we felt that the regulator has the mandate to issue then that guidance or framework for consultation. It is not our responsibility, it's the regulator's responsibility in our view. Similarly, we're close to finalizing the wheeling framework, and we'll do the same process. We'll hand it over to the regulator, and the regulator, in terms of its structures, it will have a subcommittee meeting, an ELS, electricity subcommittee meeting. It would then consider those things and make a recommendation in terms of its governance structures to a full regulatory meeting, and the regulator would then issue, of course it's public as you know, and the regulator would issue its decision. Now I think that's important, that we have to understand that's the governance that we have. While we all work together to try and address fundamentally what we want to do, fix Eskom, as the Minister regularly indicates, fix Eskom, and getting additional megawatts on the grid, we have to accept that there are responsible and independent authorities that would have to still go through the approvals. What we do insist is that we don't do it business as usual, right? So it's business unusual. We want you to not say we're going to have a meeting in the next quarter. We're in a crisis. And so crisis mode dictates that we have to have regular meetings, regular sessions of your governance structures. We've appealed, for example, to Eskom, please, are you able to expedite this? Are you able to submit it for consideration to NERSA or to where you need to submit these things? So I think it's quite important for us to understand that. That separation of authority is quite critical. We need to respect that. Otherwise, what does happen is that people challenge us in court and we have no leg to stand on. Thanks.
Oh yes, the conversation with Namibia, I think the preference there is that Eskom should be the off-taker. And of course, we have built a significant infrastructure, the second interconnector line. We have connected from our closest substation to Namibian border. We have done 1 kilometer, and on the Namibian side, NamPower has done about 96.3 kilometers to the substation in Namibia. So we're building that 400 kV line. And then that's important because in the context of this conversation, we have an appreciation of what's possible, what can be evacuated. So yes, I mean, the long and short is the expectation is, or the preference is that the off-taker should be Eskom, and I think on that basis, the project developer is able to get to financial close because Eskom is a big player, a dominant player on the South African energy market, and it can be relied upon. The signature of Eskom carries a lot of weight. Of course, it's a function, again, of the internal processes at Eskom. But what we're doing at this level, we're initiating those discussions. Remember that we're going throughout the region just trying to find out what is available from whom by when, so that when we get to make a determination, ministerial determination, we have a sense of what is available. So it's not arbitrary. We already know what can be achieved over a period of time. Some of those arrangements won't help us to resolve load shedding in the short term, but they make a major contribution in relation to energy security going into the future. And on delay, on how many municipalities have approved, is 13 of these municipalities have applied, rather, 13 have applied, and to date, 7 have been approved in relation to that debt relief program that was introduced by National Treasury. And I really want to take the opportunity once more just to say we continue to do everything possible to resolve the challenges of load shedding. Like I said the last time, I'm sure we're seeing it attenuating, and really it's a combination, of course, given the demand side, but most significantly the number we are looking at is on the generation side. I started by indicating that you can see the numbers. We are normalizing 28,000 megawatts available capacity, and then the next step is to take it at a step further to about 29,000 or so. And in that way, we are able to guarantee when we stand before you, we say load shedding is gone. It's because we are sure about the performance, the resilience of these units. Again, the issues of planned outages, like I said, we are going to ramp them up. We'll give you that number. What is the target that we have set ourselves? And that is important to ensure that we do everything possible to ensure that when we return these units, we can attest to their reliability and the efficiency, the degree to which they are able to meet or approximate their design capacity. This is the best way of ensuring that we are able to ensure that the energy availability factor does not oscillate between significant streams or extremes rather, but is consistent, and that level of consistency and predictability makes it possible for us to anticipate what is the intensity of load shedding or the absence of load shedding. Of course, going into the future is to build that resilience that I'm talking about. New generation capacity, renewables are key. Transmission is indispensable to the resolution of that problem. And now we're sharing with you that we're doing everything possible to address the issues on the distribution side. But once more, thank you very much for your time. We'll meet next Sunday. Thank you very much, teacher.
Minister, thank you very much for all the information that has been shared with the South Africans. Would like also to appreciate the time that gets to be taken by the colleagues from various media houses, including making it a point that the message gets to each and every household. We thank you, the colleagues from various government departments and from Presidency, for attending. The session is adjourned, and as Minister has said, we're meeting again on Sunday, same place, same time. Thank you.
You want me to serve as a counselor?
Which must be
Show, did you show the video?